German Shepherd was locked in a sack and thrown near a river. What baby did next? Left. Everyone in tears. The story you're about to listen to will break your heart and then put it back together again. What happened near Willow Creek will shock you to your core. If you have a pet or a child, this might just be the most emotional story you'll hear all year. Don't forget to like, share, and let us know in the comments where you were watching from. The murky waters of Willow Creek rippled silently under the pink haze of dawn. Fog drifted across the surface like ghostly fingers, reaching toward the sleepy town that hadn't yet stirred. A pair of ducks glided effortlessly across the glassy surface, their peaceful journey the only movement along the deserted shoreline. But peace can shatter in an instant. And on this particular morning, it did, with a splash and a muffled cry that didn't belong to any waterfowl. The sound came from a large burlap sack that hit the shallow water near the eastern bank. Thrown from the old wooden bridge that spanned the narrowest part of the creek, the sack landed with a sickening thud against the muddy shallows. For a moment, it floated, turning slowly in the gentle current. Then it began to sink. But the creek wasn't ready to claim what was inside. The corner of the sack caught on an exposed tree root, a lifeline extended by nature itself. The burlap material darkened as water soaked through, but it didn't submerge completely. And then, almost imperceptible at first, the sack moved, not from the current, from within. A whimper, weak and terrified, emerged from the dripping burlap. The sound floated across the water, carried by the morning mist, but there was no one to hear it. Not yet. Inside that rough, soggy prison was a 3-year-old German Shepherd, once magnificent with his tan and black coat, now matted with blood and filth. His legs were bound with zip ties so tight they cut into his flesh. His muzzle had been hastily wrapped with duct tape, allowing just enough room to breathe through his nostrils. His eyes, amber and intelligent, blinked rapidly as water began seeping through the bottom of the sack. His name was Kaiser, though no one in Willow Creek knew that yet. Kaiser had once been a beloved pet, then a terrified captive, and now he was meant to be forgotten evidence, disposed of like trash in the early morning hours when no witnesses would be present. His crime had been defiance, refusing to fight other dogs for the entertainment and profit of cruel men. When they decided he was useless, they chose a watery grave rather than a bullet. Bullets cost money. The creek disposed of problems for free. The sack twisted slightly as Kaiser struggled weakly, his strength nearly gone after days without proper food or water. His movements became more desperate as the water began to rise inside the sack, the creek slowly claiming what had been offered to it. The root holding the sack began to bend under the weight. In minutes, perhaps seconds, it would give way, and the current would carry its burden into deeper water. Nobody was supposed to be at Willow Creek at 5:30 in the morning. Nobody was supposed to hear the splash or the whimpers. Nobody was supposed to save what was meant to be lost forever. But fate has a way of rewriting stories, especially the ones that seem to have already reached their tragic end. 200 yards downstream, in the small blue house with white trim that sat closest to the creek, 4-year-old Max Brooks woke up from a dream he couldn't quite remember. Something about water, something about crying. He sat up in his race car bed, rubbing sleep from his eyes with tiny fists. The house was quiet, too early for his mother Jenny to be awake, too early for anyone to be awake. But Max was wide awake now, and he felt pulled toward his window. Max wasn't like other children his age. He didn't speak much, hadn't spoken a full sentence in months, in fact. The doctors had different terms for it: selective mutism, speech delay, possible early signs of autism, but his mother Jenny just called it Max's quiet way. He communicated through gestures, through touches, through drawings that showed more detail than a typical 4-year-old should be able to manage. And sometimes, Jenny swore, he knew things before they happened. Like this morning, something had woken him. Something was calling him. Max climbed out of bed, his dinosaur pajamas rumpled from sleep. He padded to the window and pushed aside the blue curtain decorated with stars and rockets. The creek looked different in the early morning light. Misty, mysterious, almost like another world. Max pressed his nose against the cool glass, his breath fogging the view. Then he saw it. Something by the water. Something moving. Without hesitation, Max dropped the curtain and moved with quiet determination toward his bedroom door. The worn wooden floors creaked slightly under his small feet as he made his way down the hallway. Jenny's door remained closed, her soft snores still audible. She'd worked a double shift at the diner yesterday and needed her rest. Max knew the routine. Don't wake mommy unless it's an emergency. This felt like an emergency, but not one he could explain, not one he had words for. The child navigated through the silent house with practiced ease, climbing onto the stool he used to reach the deadbolt on the back door. The lock clicked open under his small fingers. The door swung outward with a faint squeak that made Max freeze, listening for any sign that his mother might have heard. Nothing, just the distant chorus of early morning birds and the gentle babble of the creek. The grass was wet with dew as Max stepped into the backyard, soaking the bottom of his pajama feet. He didn't mind. His focus was entirely on the creek now, on whatever had called him from sleep. The family's property extended right to the water's edge, with a small wooden dock where Jenny sometimes sat in the evenings, feet dangling above the water, telling Max stories about his father, who had passed away before Max could remember him. Max made his way down the gentle slope toward the water. The mist curled around his small frame, as if welcoming him, guiding him. He moved with purpose, following the shoreline upstream, toward the old bridge. Something was wrong there. Something needed him. A sound reached his ears, faint, pained, desperate. Without knowing why, Max began to move faster, his little legs carrying him as quickly as they could over the uneven ground. Sticks and small stones poked at his feet through the thin fabric of his pajamas, but he barely noticed. The sound came again, a whimper that tugged at something deep inside Max's silent world. He rounded a bend in the creek and saw it, a dark, misshapen lump caught on a root near the water's edge. It moved slightly, then stilled. Water lapped at its edges, threatening to pull it deeper. Max approached cautiously, curiosity overcoming fear. He crouched at the edge of the creek, peering at the strange bundle. The burlap sack was sodden now, heavy with creek water, but something was definitely alive inside it. Max could see the material shift and bulge, as whatever was trapped fought weakly for life. Without hesitation, Max waded into the shallow water, his pajama bottoms immediately soaking up the cold creek water. The sack was just within reach, and Max grabbed the corner that had caught on the root, pulling it toward him with surprising strength for such a small boy. The sack was heavy, so heavy that Max nearly lost his balance in the slippery creek bed, but determination fueled his efforts. Inch by inch, he dragged the sack toward the shore, his face set in concentration, his silent world filled with purpose. When the sack was finally on solid ground, Max stood back, water dripping from his soaked pajamas, and stared at his discovery. The burlap moved again, more clearly now, and a muffled sound emerged from within, part whine, part plea. Max didn't hesitate. His small fingers worked at the knotted rope that secured the top of the sack. The rope was wet and swollen, difficult to manipulate, but Max was nothing if not persistent. When the knot finally gave way, Max pulled the opening wide. What he saw made his breath catch in his throat. Eyes. Frightened, intelligent eyes stared back at him from a face half covered in dirty duct tape. A dog, a big one, lay curled in the sack, soaking wet, trembling, bound at the legs. There was blood on its matted fur, and its sides heaved with labored breaths, but it was alive. And those eyes, they fixed on Max with an intensity that seemed to bridge the gap between species, between the speaking world and Max's silent one. In that moment, something passed between boy and dog, a recognition, a connection that defied explanation. Max didn't back away in fear as many children might have done when faced with a large, unknown animal. Instead, he reached out a small hand and gently touched the dog's head, just above those expressive eyes. Kaiser, the dog who had been beaten, bound, and discarded, did not growl, did not snap. Instead, he blinked slowly at the small human before him, a gesture of trust that seemed impossible given what he had endured at the hands of men. The dog tried to move, but the zip ties bit cruelly into his legs, and the tape around his muzzle restricted his breathing. He was helpless, at the mercy of this tiny human who had pulled him from the water. Max saw the tape and understood what needed to be done. With careful fingers, he found the edge of the duct tape and began to peel it away from the dog's muzzle. He worked slowly, with intuitive gentleness, stopping whenever Kaiser flinched. When the last of the tape came free, Kaiser exhaled deeply, his pink tongue lolling out as he panted in relief. Next came the zip ties. Max examined them with a frown, recognizing that his small fingers couldn't break or untie them. He looked around, spotted a sharp stone near the water's edge, and dragged it back to Kaiser's side. Using the edge of the stone, Max began to saw at the plastic bindings, his face a picture of concentration as he worked. It took time, precious minutes during which the sun rose higher, burning away the morning mist. Max's arms ached, his fingers grew raw from handling the rough stone, but he didn't stop. Kaiser lay perfectly still, as if understanding that this small human was trying to help. When the first zip tie snapped, freeing Kaiser's front legs, the dog didn't leap up or run away. He waited patiently as Max worked on the ties binding his back legs. When the last restraint fell away, Kaiser slowly, painfully, pushed himself to a standing position. He swayed on his feet, weakness evident in his trembling legs. Max stepped back, giving the large dog space, but remained close enough to reach out if Kaiser should fall. The German Shepherd took one unsteady step, then another. His wet fur was plastered against his body, revealing how thin he had become. Ribs protruded sharply beneath his once lustrous coat. Wounds, some fresh, some partially healed, covered his flanks and face, telling a story of systematic abuse. Kaiser shook himself, water spraying in all directions, and Max giggled silently, the first expression of joy to cross his face that morning. The sound of the boy's breath, catching in what would have been laughter, seemed to reach the dog. Kaiser's ears perked up slightly, and he turned his full attention to the child who had saved him. For a long moment, they regarded each other, the silent boy and the abused dog, both survivors in their own ways. Then, with deliberate slowness, Kaiser limped toward Max and gently pressed his head against the boy's small chest. Max's arms came up instinctively, wrapping around the dog's neck in a hug that spoke volumes without a single word. "Max!" A frantic voice cut through the morning stillness. "Max, where are you?" Jenny Brooks emerged from the trees, her hair uncombed, her face pale with worry. She wore hastily thrown-on jeans and a wrinkled t-shirt, feet shoved into rubber gardening boots without socks. The panic in her eyes turned to shock when she saw her son, soaking wet, muddy, his arms wrapped around the neck of an enormous, equally wet and muddy dog. "Max, get away from that dog, right now!" Jenny rushed forward, fear evident in every line of her body. In her mind, the scene could only mean danger, her precious, vulnerable son in the embrace of a strange, wild-looking animal. But as she got closer, something stopped her. Kaiser had turned at the sound of her voice, placing himself slightly in front of Max, not aggressively, but protectively. And Max was smiling, a real smile that reached his eyes in a way Jenny hadn't seen in months. Jenny slowed her approach, her motherly instincts still on high alert, but now tinged with confusion. "Max, honey, are you okay? Where did this dog come from?" Max didn't answer with words. He never did. But he pointed toward the creek, then to the discarded burlap sack, the broken zip ties, the pieces of dirty duct tape. His gestures became more animated as he tried to tell the story without speech, his free hand never leaving Kaiser's fur. Jenny's eyes widened as understanding dawned. Someone did this? Someone tried to... She couldn't finish the sentence, the cruelty too terrible to voice in front of her son. Instead, she knelt down, still keeping a cautious distance from the dog. "Did you save him, Max? Did you pull him from the creek?" Max nodded vigorously, pride evident in his posture. Then, something extraordinary happened. Max opened his mouth, and in a voice rusty from disuse, whispered 5 words that made Jenny's heart skip a beat. "He's my friend. His name..." Max paused, as if listening to something only he could hear, then continued. "His name is Shadow." Jenny's hand flew to her mouth, tears springing to her eyes. Max had spoken, a full sentence, and he had given the dog a name, Shadow, as if claiming him, connecting with him in a way Jenny hadn't seen Max connect with anyone or anything since his father's death. Kaiser, now Shadow, seemed to understand the significance of the moment. He leaned gently against Max's side, his amber eyes never leaving Jenny's face. Despite his battered appearance, there was a dignity to him, an intelligence that was impossible to miss. "Max, honey," Jenny said carefully, her voice steadier now, "this dog is hurt. He needs help. We should call Dr. Morales at the animal clinic." Max shook his head vehemently, his small hand clutching Shadow's fur. "Home," he said, the single word carrying the weight of a plea. "Shadow comes home." Jenny looked from her son to the dog and back again. The rational part of her mind listed all the reasons this was a bad idea. They knew nothing about this dog. He could be dangerous. He clearly needed medical attention. There might be owners looking for him, but the mother in her, the part that had watched her son retreat into silence after losing his father, the part that had tried everything to reach him, That part saw something miraculous happening right before her eyes. Max was speaking, Max was connecting, Max had saved a life and, in doing so, had found something that awakened his voice. "Okay," Jenny said softly, decision made. "Shadow can come home with us, but we still need to get him checked out by Dr. Morales. He's hurt, Max." Max nodded solemnly, accepting the compromise. He turned to Shadow and whispered something that Jenny couldn't quite catch. The dog responded by licking Max's cheek once, a gesture so gentle it brought fresh tears to Jenny's eyes. Together, the unlikely trio made their way back toward the little blue house with white trim. Max walked beside Shadow, one small hand resting on the dog's back, steadying him when his steps faltered. Jenny followed a few paces behind, phone already in hand, texting Dr. Morales about an emergency house call. As they approached the house, the morning sun finally broke through completely, casting long shadows across the dewy grass. Jenny couldn't help but notice how perfectly named the dog was. He stayed so close to Max that he was indeed like the boy's shadow, their silhouettes merging into one as they walked side by side into their uncertain future. Behind them, the creek continued its eternal journey, the empty burlap sack left on the shore as the only evidence of what had almost been a tragedy. But fate, or perhaps something more deliberate, had intervened. A silent boy had spoken. A discarded dog had found purpose. And Jenny Brooks had the strange but unshakable feeling that their lives had just changed forever. Little did she know how right she was. The story of Max and Shadow was just beginning, and what would happen next would leave not just Jenny, but an entire town in tears. The morning sun climbed higher, casting golden light through the kitchen windows of the little blue house. Shadow lay on an old blanket Jenny had spread on the floor, his large body taking up most of the space between the refrigerator and the kitchen table. Max sat cross-legged beside him, one small hand resting protectively on the dog's damp fur. He hadn't moved from Shadow's side since they'd entered the house, hadn't even changed out of his wet pajamas, despite Jenny's gentle urging. "Dr. Morales will be here in 20 minutes, Jenny said, setting a bowl of water on the floor near Shadow's head. "And I found some leftover chicken in the fridge. Do you think he's hungry?" Max nodded vigorously, reaching for the plate of shredded chicken Jenny held. With careful fingers, he offered a small piece to Shadow. The German shepherd sniffed cautiously, then delicately took the meat from Max's palm, his movements slow and deliberate, as if afraid of frightening the boy or appearing greedy. Jenny watched in wonder as her son fed the dog piece by piece, whispering words too soft for her to catch. Max was speaking, not just the single sentence from earlier, but an actual conversation, albeit one she wasn't meant to hear. The knot in her throat grew tighter. In the year since her husband David's sudden death, Max had retreated so far into himself that some days she wondered if she'd ever hear his voice again. The specialists had offered diagnoses, therapies, medications, none of which had broken through the wall of silence Max had built around himself. And now, this. A half-drowned dog with wounds that spoke of unspeakable cruelty had somehow reached her son when nothing and no one else could. Shadow finished the chicken and licked Max's fingers clean, earning a silent giggle from the boy. Then the dog's head turned toward the front door, ears perking up slightly, a low rumble building in his chest. "It's okay," Jenny said quickly, recognizing the signs of protective alertness. "That's probably Dr. Morales." As if confirming her words, a gentle knock sounded at the door. Shadow's posture remained tense, but he didn't bark, seemingly taking his cue from Max's calm demeanor. Jenny hurried to answer, relief washing over her at the sight of the kind-faced veterinarian on her porch. Elena Morales had been Willow Creek's only vet for 15 years, treating everything from prize cattle to pet hamsters with the same careful attention. In her mid-50s, with silver-streaked dark hair and laugh lines around her eyes, she carried a weathered leather medical bag that had once belonged to her father. "Jenny," she greeted with a warm smile that faded as she took in Jenny's disheveled appearance. "You said it was urgent?" "Yes, thank you for coming so quickly." Jenny stepped back, allowing Elena to enter. Well, you should see for yourself." Elena followed Jenny to the kitchen, her professional demeanor shifting subtly when she caught sight of Max and Shadow. Her eyes widened briefly, then narrowed in clinical assessment as she took in the dog's condition. "Oh my," she said softly, kneeling a few feet away from the pair. "Hello there, Max. And who's your friend?" Max didn't answer, but his hand tightened in Shadow's fur. the German Shepherd's amber eyes fixed on Elena, wary but not hostile. Jenny quickly explained the morning's events, keeping her voice low and even, aware of how Max tensed at certain parts of the story. By the time she finished, Elena's face had hardened into an expression Jenny had rarely seen on the usually gentle veterinarian. "I've seen cases like this before," she said grimly. "The rope marks on his neck, the pattern of the wounds. This dog was likely used in fighting rings. When they wouldn't fight anymore or lost too many matches, they—" She glanced at Max and left the sentence unfinished. "Can you help him?" Jenny asked. Elena nodded, opening her medical bag. "May I approach him, Max? I need to check how badly he's hurt." Max hesitated, then nodded once, though he didn't move from Shadow's side. Elena approached slowly, narrating her movements in a calm, even voice. "I'm just going to feel along his ribs now, check for any breaks. Then I'll look at these cuts, see if any need stitches." Shadow remained perfectly still during the examination, his eyes never leaving Max's face, as if drawing courage from the boy's presence. Only when Elena gently probed a particularly deep wound on his flank did he flinch, a soft whine escaping his throat. "I'm sorry, boy," Elena murmured. "I know that hurts." Max leaned down, pressing his forehead against Shadow's, whispering something that made the dog's tail thump once against the blanket. The gesture was so intimate, so full of trust, that both women fell silent, unwilling to intrude on the moment. Finally, Elena sat back on her heels. "Well, the good news is that nothing seems to be broken. He's malnourished and dehydrated, and these wounds need cleaning and treatment, but with proper care, he should recover fully." She reached into her bag for antiseptic and bandages. "The bad news is that dogs like this, dogs that have been exposed to fighting rings, sometimes have behavioral issues that don't surface right away. PTSD, aggression triggers." "He won't hurt Max," Jenny said with sudden certainty. "You should have seen him at the creek. He was protecting him from the moment they met." Elena's hands stilled. "That's unusual, especially for a dog that's been through what this one has." She glanced thoughtfully at Max, who was now gently stroking Shadow's head, his small fingers careful to avoid the cuts near the dog's ears. "Has Max been speaking to you again, since finding the dog?" Jenny nodded, tears threatening again. "A few words, more than he's said in months." Elena's expression softened. Maybe they recognized something in each other. She resumed cleaning Shadow's wounds, working methodically around Max's still form. "Animals can sense things we can't sometimes, and they don't carry the same emotional baggage we do. They live in the present. Maybe that's what Max needs right now, someone who doesn't look at him and see the trauma, who just accepts him as he is in this moment." As if to confirm her words, Shadow turned his head and gently licked Max's cheek, earning another of those rare silent giggles. The sound lightened the kitchen's somber atmosphere, drawing smiles from both women. "I'll need to come back to check on him in a few days," Elena said as she finished bandaging the worst of Shadow's wounds. "And he'll need antibiotics. I've got some in the car." She hesitated, then added, "Jenny, I should report this. Animal cruelty like this, it's connected to other crimes. The sheriff should know." Jenny tensed, instinctively glancing at Max. "Can it wait? Just a day or two? Max has been through so much already, and now he's finally starting to heal," Elena finished softly. "I understand." She closed her medical bag with a decisive click. 2 days. Then I'm calling Sheriff Dawson. In the meantime, keep Shadow quiet, keep the wounds clean, and make sure he has plenty of water. Feed him small meals several times a day rather than 1 or 2 large ones. His system needs to adjust. After Elena left, armed with a promise from Jenny to call immediately if Shadow's condition worsened, Jenny finally convinced Max to change into dry clothes while she prepared lunch. The boy only agreed after positioning Shadow's blanket, where he could see the dog from every part of the kitchen. The rest of the day passed in a strange, peaceful rhythm, unlike anything Jenny had experienced since losing David. Max remained largely silent with her, but she caught him whispering to Shadow when he thought she wasn't listening. The dog followed Max everywhere he went, moving stiffly but determinedly, as if afraid to let the boy out of his sight. When Max napped in the afternoon, exhausted from his early morning adventure, Shadow lay beside the couch, his head resting on paws positioned so he faced the front door, a guardian even in rest. As evening approached, Jenny stood at the kitchen sink, watching through the window as Max sat on the back steps, Shadow beside him. The boy's arm was draped across the dog's back, his head bent close as if sharing secrets. The sight brought a lump to Jenny's throat. This morning, she'd woken to an empty bed, a silent house, and the same heavy weight of grief that had been her constant companion since the accident that took her husband. Now, somehow, a sliver of light had penetrated that darkness. Her phone buzzed on the counter, startling her from her thoughts. Unknown caller. Jenny hesitated, then answered. "Hello? Mrs. Brooks?" A man's voice, unfamiliar. "This is Deputy Wilson down at the sheriff's office. Dr. Morales called us about an incident involving your son and an injured dog." Jenny's grip tightened on the phone. "She said she'd wait." "Yes, ma'am, she did mention that," the deputy cut in, his tone apologetic. "But we've had reports of suspicious activity around Willow Creek lately. Men in trucks who don't belong here, strange noises at night. And this morning, a local farmer found blood and what looked like dog hair on the bridge. When Dr. Morales called to ask about any recent reports of animal cruelty, well, these things might be connected." Jenny turned away from the window, lowering her voice. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying," Deputy Wilson replied carefully, "that whatever happened to that dog might be part of something bigger. And if your son witnessed anything, saw anyone—" "He didn't," Jenny said quickly. "He just found the dog already in the creek. Still, Sheriff Dawson would like to come by tomorrow, ask a few questions. Nothing that would upset the boy," he added hastily. "Just routine." After extracting a promise that the sheriff wouldn't arrive before noon, Max had therapy in the morning, an appointment Jenny wasn't about to cancel despite the day's developments. Jenny hung up, unease settling in her stomach like a cold weight. Something bigger, men in trucks who don't belong. The phrases echoed in her mind as she called Max in for dinner. What had her son stumbled into? Max ate with more appetite than he had shown in weeks, occasionally slipping bits of his chicken under the table to Shadow, who had positioned himself at the boy's feet. Jenny pretended not to notice, relief at seeing Max engaged with his food, outweighing any concerns about proper pet etiquette. After dinner, as she was clearing the plates, Max spoke again, his third time that day. "Shadow sleeps with me." Jenny turned, surprised both by the words and their clarity. Max stood by his chair, one hand resting on Shadow's head, his expression determined, not a request, a statement of fact. "Honey, Shadow needs to rest somewhere comfortable. With his injuries—" "My bed is comfortable," Max insisted, his voice growing stronger with each word. "He needs me." Jenny felt her resistance crumbling in the face of her son's newfound voice. "Okay," she agreed, "but I'll put an extra blanket down to protect your sheets from the medicine on his cuts." Max nodded solemnly, then surprised her by crossing the kitchen and wrapping his arms around her waist in a tight hug. The simple gesture, so normal for most mothers and children, so rare in her life these days, brought tears to Jenny's eyes. She stroked Max's hair, savoring the moment, acutely aware of Shadow watching them from across the room, his amber eyes somehow knowing. That night, after helping Max arrange an old quilt on his bed for Shadow, Jenny stood in the doorway watching as her son curled up beside the large dog, his small body fitting perfectly against Shadow's side. The German Shepherd lay on top of the covers, his position allowing him a clear view of both the bedroom door and the window, protective, alert, yet gentle as he nuzzled Max's hair with his nose. "Good night, Max," Jenny said softly. "Good night, Shadow." Max's eyes were already drifting closed, one hand buried in Shadow's fur. "Night, Mommy," he murmured sleepily. "Shadow says night, too." Jenny closed the door part way, leaving it open enough for the hallway light to spill in. Max didn't like total darkness. Then she retreated to the living room, collapsing onto the couch with her phone, unsure whether to laugh or cry at the day's events. She settled for texting Olivia, her closest friend and Max's godmother. "You won't believe what happened today." As she waited for Olivia's response, Jenny's eyes fell on the family photo on the mantle, herself, David, and baby Max, all smiling in the summer sunshine, unaware of the loss that lay ahead. For the first time in months, the sight didn't bring just pain. Tonight, alongside the familiar ache of grief, there was something else, something that felt dangerously like hope. Her phone buzzed with Olivia's reply, "Tell me everything." Jenny smiled, fingers hovering over the keypad. How to explain the miracle that had walked into their lives, wrapped in wet burlap and covered in wounds? How to convey what it meant to hear Max's voice again, to see him reaching out instead of withdrawing? Before she could begin typing, a sound from outside caught her attention. The crunch of tires on gravel, then silence. Jenny froze, listening. Their house sat at the end of a dead-end road. No one drove past by accident. She rose quietly and moved to the window, peering out into the darkness. At first, she saw nothing. Then, as her eyes adjusted, she made out the silhouette of a vehicle pulled to the side of the road about 50 yards from their driveway. A truck, its headlights off, engine silent. Just sitting there, watching. A chill ran down Jenny's spine. She pulled the curtains closed with shaking hands, then checked all the doors and windows, making sure everything was locked. As she passed Max's room, she peeked inside to find both boy and dog sound asleep. Shadow's large body curled protectively around Max's small frame. Jenny returned to the living room and picked up her phone again, adding to her text to Olivia. "Actually, can you come over tomorrow? I think something strange is happening, and I'm scared." In Max's room, unseen by Jenny, Shadow's eyes opened in the darkness. His ears twitched, head lifting slightly as he listened to sounds too faint for human ears. A low, almost inaudible growl rumbled in his chest. Max stirred beside him, one small hand instinctively tightening in the dog's fur. Shadow immediately went silent, settling back down, but his eyes remained open, fixed on the bedroom door. Outside, the truck sat for 10 more minutes before its engine quietly started, and it rolled away into the night. But something told Shadow, and perhaps Jenny too, that whoever had been watching would be back. The peace they had found that day was fragile, temporary. A storm was gathering on the horizon, and somehow, at the center of it all, was the unexpected bond between a silent boy and a discarded dog. Morning arrived with the cheerful obliviousness of a world unaware of lurking dangers. Sunlight streamed through Max's bedroom window, painting warm rectangles on the wooden floor. Jenny stood in the doorway, coffee mug in hand, watching her son sleep peacefully for the first time in months. Max was curled against Shadow's side, one arm flung across the dog's broad chest, his face buried in the soft fur. The German shepherd's eyes were open, alert, tracking Jenny's movements with quiet intelligence. "Good morning, Shadow," she whispered. The dog's tail thumped once against the bed, acknowledgement without disturbing the sleeping child. Jenny smiled despite the worry that had kept her awake most of the night. There was something about Shadow that defied her expectations of what a formerly abused dog should be like. No cowering, no aggression, just this watchful calmness and the unmistakable protectiveness toward Max. She checked her watch, 7:15. Max's therapy appointment was at 9 WUK, and she still needed to figure out what to do about Shadow. She couldn't leave him alone, not when he was injured and in a strange place. But bringing him to the Children's Therapy Center wasn't an option either. As if sensing her dilemma, Shadow carefully extracted himself from Max's embrace, moving with deliberate gentleness so as not to wake the boy. He padded across the room to Jenny, moving stiffly, but with more strength than he had shown yesterday. At the doorway, he sat, looking up at her with those intelligent amber eyes. "You need to go outside?" Jenny whispered. Shadow stood, confirming her guess. Jenny led him through the quiet house to the back door, watching as he limped down the steps into the yard. The morning dew soaked his bandages almost immediately, but he seemed unbothered, focused on his task. When he finished, instead of returning to the house right away, Shadow made a slow circuit of the yard, nose to the ground, pausing occasionally to lift his head and scan the tree line that separated their property from the neighboring woods. Patrolling, Jenny realized, checking for threats. Shadow completed his inspection and returned to the porch, looking marginally satisfied. Jenny held the door open, and he padded back inside, heading straight for Max's room. Jenny followed, watching as the dog resumed his position on the bed. Max, still asleep, immediately curled back against him with a soft sigh of contentment. The scene solidified Jenny's decision. Shadow clearly needed to stay with Max, which meant she needed backup for the therapy appointment. She sent a quick text to Olivia. "Can you come over ASAP? Need you to dog sit while I take Max to therapy? Long story." The reply came seconds later. "On my way. Coffee better be ready." By the time Olivia arrived 30 minutes later, Jenny had managed to coax Max out of bed and into fresh clothes. The boy was unusually cooperative, getting dressed without complaint and even eating a few bites of toast, as long as Shadow remained within sight. The dog followed Max around the house, never more than a few feet away, his movements becoming more fluid as his stiff muscles warmed up. Olivia Taylor had been Jenny's best friend since high school, and Max's godmother since his birth. A kindergarten teacher with a riot of red curls and a perpetually sunny disposition, she was one of the few people Max still responded to after David's death. "Holy moly!" Olivia exclaimed, stopping short in the kitchen doorway at the sight of Shadow sitting beside Max's chair. "When you said dog sit, I was thinking more along the lines of a golden retriever puppy, not... Is that a German shepherd? With bandages?" Max looked up, his expression immediately guarded. His hand found Shadow's head, fingers curling protectively in the dog's fur. "Liv, meet Shadow," Jenny said quickly. "Shadow, this is Olivia. She's a friend." Shadow regarded Olivia calmly, neither friendly nor hostile, simply assessing. After a moment, his posture relaxed slightly. Apparently, she passed whatever test he'd administered. "It's a really long story," Jenny added, "which I promise to tell you everything about when we get back. But right now, we're running late for Max's appointment with Dr. Winters." Olivia nodded, never taking her eyes off the unusual pair. "No problem. I'll hold down the fort." She addressed Max directly, her voice gentle. "Is it okay if I keep Shadow company while you're gone, buddy? I'll take good care of him, I promise." Max hesitated, his gaze darting between Shadow and Olivia. Finally, he leaned down to whisper something in the dog's ear. Shadow responded by licking Max's cheek once, then moving to sit beside Olivia, as if accepting the temporary arrangement. "He'll be right here when you get back," Olivia assured Max. "Maybe we'll even change his bandages like Dr. Morales showed your mom." The mention of the veterinarian seemed to satisfy Max. He nodded once, then rose from his chair, ready to leave, though clearly reluctant. At the door, he turned back for one last look at Shadow, who sat perfectly still, watching him go. "He'll be fine," Jenny said, gently guiding Max to the car. "Olivia will take good care of him." The drive to Dr. Winters' office took 15 minutes, passing through the sleepy center of Willow Creek with its single traffic light and row of mom-and-pop businesses. Max stared out the window, fingers tracing patterns on the glass, his thoughts clearly back at home with Shadow. "Dr. Winters will be excited to hear you've been talking again," Jenny said, breaking the comfortable silence. Max turned to look at her, his expression suddenly serious. "Shadow needs me to talk." The simple statement caught Jenny off guard. "What do you mean, honey?" Max's brow furrowed in concentration, as if searching for words to express a complex concept. "He was hurt, like me, inside." He tapped his chest. "But he's brave, so I have to be brave too." Jenny's throat tightened. It was the longest string of sentences Max had spoken in public since David's death. "You're both very brave," she managed, blinking back tears. Max nodded, satisfied with her response, and returned to looking out the window. But something had shifted. A door had been cracked open, letting in a sliver of light. Dr. Rebecca Winters' office occupied the second floor of a converted Victorian house on Maple Street. Decorated in soothing blues and greens, with child-sized furniture and shelves of toys and books, it was designed to put young patients at ease. Max had been coming here twice a week for the past 8 months, rarely speaking, but occasionally communicating through drawing or play therapy. Today, however, was different. "He found a dog," Max announced as soon as they entered the therapy room, surprising both Jenny and Dr. Winters. "In the creek, in a bag. Someone tried to drown him, but I saved him. His name is Shadow." Dr. Winters, a woman in her early 40s with kind eyes and a calm demeanor, recovered quickly from her shock at hearing Max speak unprompted. "That sounds like quite an adventure," she said, sitting cross-legged on the floor across from Max. "Would you like to tell me more about Shadow?" And Max did. For nearly the entire 50-minute session, he talked about Shadow, how the dog had been tied up and hurt, how brave he was, how he stayed close to Max all the time. Dr. Winters listened attentively, asking gentle questions that Max actually answered, drawing out details and emotions that Jenny had never heard her son express before. "Shadow understands me," Max said earnestly at one point, "even when I don't talk, and I understand him too." "That's a very special connection," Dr. Winters replied. "How does it make you feel, having Shadow with you?" Max thought for a moment. "Safe," he said finally, "and not so lonely inside my head." Jenny, observing from a chair in the corner, had to turn away to hide her tears. When the session ended, Dr. Winters walked them to the door, her expression thoughtful. "This is remarkable progress, Jenny," she said quietly, while Max put on his jacket. "I haven't seen him this engaged or verbal since we started therapy. It's all happened so suddenly, Jenny confessed. Just since yesterday morning when he found Shadow. Dr. Winters nodded. Sometimes trauma survivors recognize something in each other. There's a shorthand to their communication, a shared understanding that bypasses the usual barriers. She glanced at Max, who was waiting patiently by the door. I'd like to see him again on Friday, if that works for you, and I'd be very interested in meeting Shadow at some point. The drive home was quiet, Max having retreated back into himself after the unusual exertion of speaking so much during therapy. But it was a comfortable silence, not the heavy, grief-laden quiet that had dominated their lives for so long. As Jenny turned onto their street, Max suddenly sat up straighter, pressing his face against the window. "Shadow," he said, his voice tight with an emotion Jenny couldn't immediately identify. "Shadow knows something's wrong." Before Jenny could respond, Max was pointing urgently ahead. "Look!" Jenny looked and felt her heart skip a beat. A gray pickup truck was parked across the street from their house. The same truck she'd glimpsed last night? She couldn't be sure, but what caught her attention more was the man standing at their front gate, talking to Olivia, who held Shadow by what appeared to be a makeshift leash fashioned from a belt. Even from this distance, Jenny could see that Shadow's posture was rigid, his hackles raised. Olivia's body language screamed discomfort, one arm crossed protectively over her chest as she shook her head at whatever the man was saying. "Stay in the car," Jenny ordered as she pulled into the driveway. But Max was already unbuckling his seatbelt, his small face set in determination. "Shadow needs me," he said simply, and pushed open the door before Jenny could stop him. "Max, wait!" Jenny scrambled out after him, heart pounding. The man at the gate turned at their approach, and Jenny felt a chill run down her spine. Tall and broad-shouldered, with close-cropped hair and cold eyes, he looked out of place in small-town Willow Creek. He wore jeans and a dark jacket despite the warm spring morning, and something about the way he stood, balanced on the balls of his feet, hands never still, set off alarm bells in Jenny's mind. "There he is," the man said, his voice deceptively friendly as he spotted Shadow. "Been looking all over for my dog." Shadow's reaction was immediate and unmistakable. A low growl rumbled from his chest, and he backed away from the gate, straining against Olivia's makeshift leash. "Your dog?" Jenny moved to stand between Max and the stranger. "I don't think so." The man's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Name's Ray Miller. That there's my hunting dog, Kaiser. Slipped his collar 2 days ago while I was passing through. Been searching high and low." He reached into his pocket and produced a worn leather collar. "See? Got his tags and everything." Jenny glanced at the collar. It looked weathered enough to be legitimate, but something felt off. "That's not his name anymore," she said firmly. "And he wasn't wearing a collar when my son found him yesterday." "Found him?" Ray's eyes narrowed slightly. "Where exactly?" Max pushed forward before Jenny could stop him. "In the creek," he said clearly, his voice stronger than Jenny had heard it in a year. "In a sack, with tape on his mouth and ties on his legs. Someone tried to kill him." The temperature seemed to drop several degrees as Ray's friendly facade slipped for just an instant. His eyes flicked to Max, cold and calculating, then back to Jenny. "Kids and their imaginations," he said with a forced chuckle. "Must have lost his collar in the water. Probably jumped in after a squirrel or something, got himself tangled up in some fishing line. Lucky your boy found him." "Very lucky," Jenny agreed, not bothering to hide the steel in her voice. "So lucky that we've already reported the incident to the sheriff. Animal cruelty is taken very seriously around here, Mr. Miller." Something dangerous flashed in Ray's eyes, there and gone so quickly, Jenny almost missed it. "No need to get authorities involved in a simple misunderstanding. Just give me back my dog, and I'll be on my way." Shadow's growl grew louder, drawing everyone's attention. The German Shepherd was now standing directly in front of Max, body tensed as if ready to spring, his focus entirely on Ray. "Does that look like your dog?" Olivia challenged, finding her voice at last. "Because from where I'm standing, that looks like a dog who's terrified of you." Ray's jaw tightened. Dogs get confused, especially after trauma. He just needs to come home, get back to his routine. "I don't think so," Jenny said, pulling out her phone. "In fact, I'm calling Sheriff Dawson right now. He can sort this out officially." Ray's hand shot out, closing around Jenny's wrist with bruising force before she could dial. "I don't think that's necessary." A blur of motion interrupted him as Shadow lunged forward, breaking free from Olivia's improvised leash. The German Shepherd didn't attack, but positioned himself between Ray and Jenny, teeth bared in a warning snarl that left no room for misinterpretation. Ray dropped Jenny's wrist and stepped back, his expression hardening into something ugly. "You're making a mistake," he said coldly. "That dog is valuable property." "He's not property," Max said, stepping up beside Shadow, one small hand resting on the dog's back. "He's my friend, and you hurt him." Ray stared at the unlikely pair for a long moment, calculating. Then, abruptly, he turned and walked back to his truck. "This isn't over," he called over his shoulder. "I'll be back with papers proving he's mine. You'll see." They watched in tense silence as Ray climbed into his truck and drove away, tires spitting gravel. "Oh my God," Olivia breathed as soon as the truck disappeared around the bend. "Jenny, who was that?" "Trouble," Jenny said grimly, rubbing her wrist where Ray's fingers had left red marks. "Max, are you okay?" But Max wasn't listening. He had dropped to his knees beside Shadow, arms wrapped around the dog's neck, whispering something urgent in his ear. Shadow had stopped growling the moment Ray left, and now he licked Max's cheek, as if reassuring the boy that all was well. "We need to call the sheriff," Olivia said, pulling out her own phone. "That man, the way he looked at Max." Jenny nodded, a cold weight settling in her stomach. "I know, it wasn't just about the dog." As Olivia made the call, Jenny crouched beside Max and Shadow. "You were very brave, both of you," she said softly. "But Max, that man is dangerous. If you ever see him again, I need you to run and find me or another adult right away. Promise?" Max looked up, his eyes older than his years. "Shadow won't let him hurt us," he said with absolute certainty. "Shadow knows who he is." "What do you mean, honey?" Max glanced at Shadow, then back to Jenny. "He's the man from my dreams, the one in the gray truck, the one who watches." A chill ran down Jenny's spine. "What dreams, Max? You've never told me about any dreams." But Max had already turned back to Shadow, his expression closed once more. The brief window of communication had shut again, leaving Jenny with more questions than answers, and a growing sense that the danger surrounding them was far more complex than she had initially feared. Inside the house, as Olivia made tea and waited for the sheriff to arrive, Jenny noticed something she'd missed in the confrontation's aftermath. The bandages on Shadow's flanks were spotted with fresh blood. He had reopened his wounds during the standoff with Ray. Yet the dog showed no signs of pain or distress, maintaining his vigilant position beside Max as the boy colored quietly at the kitchen table. "He needs a vet," Jenny murmured to Olivia, "but I'm afraid to leave the house now." Olivia squeezed her friend's hand. "Call Dr. Morales. Ask her to come back. And Jenny," she lowered her voice further, "that man wasn't just after the dog. The way he looked at Max, it was like he recognized him." "That's impossible," Jenny protested, but a seed of doubt had already taken root. "Max has never seen him before yesterday." "Are you sure?" Olivia glanced at the boy, who was now drawing something with intense concentration. "He said the man was from his dreams. What if they're not dreams? What if they're memories?" Before Jenny could respond, the sound of tires on gravel announced another arrival. Both women tensed until they saw the familiar sheriff's SUV pulling into the driveway. "Stay with Max," Jenny said, moving toward the door. "I need to talk to Sheriff Dawson. And I think it's time we found out exactly who or what Shadow was running from." As Jenny stepped onto the porch, Shadow raised his head, ears alert. Something in his posture suggested that the approaching sheriff wasn't the only visitor they should be expecting. Whatever storm had been gathering was about to break, and somehow, at the center of it all, was the silent boy and the discarded dog who had found each other against all odds. Sheriff Thomas Dawson was a fixture in Willow Creek, having served the small town for over 20 years. Tall and lean, with salt and pepper hair and deep laugh lines that spoke of a man who smiled easily, he projected an air of calm authority that had seen the community through everything from flash floods to the occasional meth lab bust in the surrounding rural areas. But today, as he climbed the porch steps to greet Jenny, his expression was grave. "Morning, Jenny," he said, tipping his hat. "Heard you had some trouble?" Jenny nodded, unconsciously rubbing her wrist where Ray's fingers had left marks. "A man showed up claiming Shadow, that's the dog Max found, belongs to him, said his name was Ray Miller." The sheriff's eyes narrowed slightly. "Describe him for me?" As Jenny detailed the confrontation, Dawson's expression grew increasingly troubled. He pulled out a small notebook and jotted down notes, asking occasional questions about Ray's appearance, his truck, and exactly what he had said about Shadow. "And Max spoke to him?" Dawson confirmed, eyebrows rising. "Directly?" "Yes," Jenny replied, surprised by his focus on this detail. "It's been a breakthrough, actually. Since finding Shadow, Max has started talking again, more than he has since David died." Something like sympathy flickered across Dawson's weathered face. "That's good to hear, Jenny. Real good." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I need to speak with Max if that's all right. Just a few questions." Jenny hesitated. "He's been through a lot, Tom, and he's just starting to open up." "I understand," Dawson said gently, "but this situation might be more complicated than a disputed dog ownership. The man you described matches someone we've been looking for in connection with some concerning activities." A chill ran down Jenny's spine. "What kind of activities?" Instead of answering directly, Dawson asked, "Did Dr. Morales examine the dog?" Jenny nodded. "Yesterday. She said Shadow had injuries consistent with being used in dogfighting." "Dogfighting is just the surface," Dawson said grimly. "We've been getting reports for months about a traveling operation, moves from county to county, sets up fights for a weekend, then disappears before local law enforcement catches on. But there's been rumors of other things happening at these gatherings. Drugs, of course, gambling, but also—" He trailed off, glancing toward the house. "Also what?" Jenny pressed, dread building in her stomach. Dawson sighed heavily. "We've had reports of children going missing from areas where these fights have taken place. Nothing solid enough for the feds to step in yet, but enough of a pattern that we've been sharing information with neighboring counties." The world seemed to tilt beneath Jenny's feet. "Children? I'm not saying that's what we're dealing with here," Dawson added quickly, "but I need to ask Max about the man, see if there's any connection." Jenny wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the warm spring day. "You think this Ray person might have been—" "What? Looking for Max specifically? That's impossible. We've lived in Willow Creek for years. Max was born here." "Probably nothing," Dawson agreed, though his expression remained troubled. "But I still need to talk to him, and I'd like to see the dog, too. If he was part of a fighting ring, he might be evidence." Inside, they found Max still at the kitchen table, now showing Olivia his drawing. Shadow lay at his feet, alert but calm. The dog's eyes tracked Sheriff Dawson as he entered, but there was no aggression in his posture, only watchful assessment. "Hey there, Max," Dawson said, crouching down to the boy's level. "Remember me? I brought you that police badge sticker last 4th of July. Max nodded, regarding the sheriff with solemn eyes. "Your mom tells me you found a pretty special dog yesterday," Dawson continued, glancing at Shadow. "Mind if I say hello to him?" Max considered this, then nodded again. "His name is Shadow," he said clearly. If Dawson was surprised by Max speaking, he hid it well. "Shadow, huh? That's a good name." He slowly extended his hand, palm up, allowing the German shepherd to sniff him. Shadow leaned forward cautiously, nostrils flaring as he took in the sheriff's scent. After a moment, the dog relaxed slightly. Another person apparently deemed acceptable. "He likes you," Max said, a hint of surprise in his voice. Dawson smiled. "Well, I like him too. Seems like a brave fella." He turned his attention back to Max, expression growing more serious. "Max, I need to ask you something important. About the man who came here today. The one who said Shadow belonged to him." Max's hand found Shadow's fur, fingers curling into the thick ruff at the dog's neck. "He was lying," the boy said firmly. "Shadow isn't his. Shadow ran away from him because he's a bad man." "How do you know he's bad?" Dawson asked carefully. Max's gaze dropped to his drawing. "I saw him, before." Jenny moved closer, looking over Max's shoulder at the paper, her breath caught in her throat. The drawing showed a bridge over water, clearly Willow Creek, with a large gray truck parked on it. A dark figure stood by the truck, holding what appeared to be a large sack over the water. In the background, partially hidden behind trees, was a small figure watching. The detail was remarkable for a child Max's age. The position of the truck, the distinctive crack in the bridge's wooden railing, even the time displayed on the wristwatch of the dark figure, 5:15. "Max," Jenny said, her voice barely above a whisper, "when did you draw this?" "Last night," Max replied, still not looking up. "After my dream." But this is the creek where you found Shadow, Jenny pressed. And is that you? Watching? Max nodded. I saw him, the bad man, but he didn't see me. Sheriff Dawson's expression had turned deadly serious. Max, are you saying you saw this man, the one who came to your house today, dropping something in the creek before you found Shadow? Max hesitated, looking up at Shadow as if seeking guidance. The dog gently nuzzled the boy's hand, and something seemed to pass between them, a wordless communication. I couldn't sleep, Max said finally. I wanted to see the sunrise on the water, like Daddy used to show me. I was hiding in the trees. I saw the truck stop on the bridge. The man threw the bag in the water. Then he drove away. He pointed to the truck in his drawing. Same truck, same man. Jenny's hand flew to her mouth. Oh my God, Max, why didn't you tell me? I was scared, Max whispered, and I didn't have words. Not until Shadow came. The kitchen fell silent as the adults processed this revelation. Max had witnessed Ray Miller attempting to drown Shadow, which meant he could identify him as the perpetrator of animal cruelty. But it also meant something far more dangerous. Ray had seen Max today, at the house, and now knew that there was a witness to his crime. Sheriff Dawson broke the silence, his voice gentle but firm. Max, you did a brave thing telling us this. It helps me understand what happened. He turned to Jenny. I'm going to put out an APB on Miller's truck, get some deputies to patrol the area. In the meantime, I think it might be best if you and Max stayed somewhere else for a few days. We could go to my place, Olivia offered immediately. I've got plenty of room, and it's in town, not isolated like here. Jenny nodded numbly, still trying to process that her son had witnessed a crime, had been keeping this secret bottled up inside him. Max, honey, why didn't you tell Dr. Winters about seeing the man? Or me? Max looked down at Shadow, who had pressed himself closer to the boy's legs. Shadow told me to wait until it was safe. The adults exchanged glances over Max's head. The bond between boy and dog had clearly developed into something beyond ordinary pet ownership, something that, in Max's mind at least, included Shadow guiding his actions. Well, Dawson said, rising to his feet, Shadow seems like a smart dog, and now that you've told us, we can help keep you both safe. He pulled out his radio. I'm going to call for a patrol car to escort you to Olivia's place. Pack what you need for a few days, clothes, medications, whatever Shadow needs too. As Jenny and Olivia quickly gathered essentials, Max remained at the table, adding details to his drawing. Sheriff Dawson stood by the window, dividing his attention between watching the road and observing Max and Shadow. The German Shepherd hadn't moved from the boy's side, his posture alert but calm, as if he understood exactly what was happening. You two have a special connection, don't you? Dawson said quietly. Max nodded without looking up. Shadow says I helped him heal his outside hurts. And he's helping me heal my inside hurts. Dawson's weathered face softened. Sounds like a fair trade to me. By the time Deputy Wilson arrived to escort them to Olivia's house, Jenny had packed enough for several days, including Shadow's medications and bandages. The German Shepherd watched the proceedings with intelligent eyes, following Max's every movement as if afraid to let the boy out of his sight. We'll find Miller, Dawson assured Jenny as they loaded the car. In the meantime, keep doors locked and stay close to home. I've already called Dr. Morales. She'll come to Olivia's this afternoon to check on Shadow's wounds. Jenny nodded, her mind still reeling from the morning's revelations. Tom, she said quietly, ensuring Max couldn't overhear, you don't really think this has anything to do with those missing children, do you? That he was after Max specifically? Dawson's expression was guarded. Probably not. Most likely he's just worried about the dog identifying him for the fighting ring. But until we know for sure, he left the sentence unfinished, but his meaning was clear, better safe than sorry. The next 3 days passed in a blur of anxiety and strange domesticity at Olivia's cozy bungalow in town. Max seemed to thrive in the new environment, perhaps because Shadow was with him, perhaps because the immediate danger had passed. He spoke more frequently, not just to Shadow, but to Jenny and Olivia as well, sharing simple observations or asking questions as if testing the waters of verbal communication after his long silence. Shadow's physical condition improved rapidly under Dr. Morales' care. The wounds on his flanks began to heal, the deeper cuts closing cleanly without infection. His strength returned, evident in the more fluid way he moved and the increasing playfulness he showed with Max and Olivia's fenced backyard. It's remarkable, Dr. Morales commented on her third visit, watching Max and Shadow through the kitchen window as they played a gentle game of tug-of-war with an old rope toy. I've treated dogs rescued from fighting rings before. They usually take months to trust humans again, if they ever do. But Shadow? He's special, Jenny agreed, sipping the herbal tea Olivia had pressed on her, a blend supposedly helpful for stress and anxiety. The way he understands Max, the way they communicate, I've never seen anything like it. Dr. Morales nodded thoughtfully. There's an organization in Cincinnati that trains service dogs specifically for children with trauma or communication difficulties. It takes months of specialized training, thousands of dollars, and here's Shadow, doing it instinctively. She turned to Jenny, her expression serious. Whatever happens with this Miller character, you need to keep that dog. He's doing more for Max than any therapy could. Jenny didn't need convincing. In just a few days, she had witnessed a transformation in her son. The silent, withdrawn child who had retreated into himself after David's death was gradually emerging from his shell, encouraged and supported by Shadow's constant, patient presence. On the fourth morning, Sheriff Dawson arrived at Olivia's house with news. "We found Miller's truck," he announced, accepting the coffee Olivia offered. "Abandoned at a motel just across the county line. Room was cleaned out, but we found something interesting." He pulled out his phone, showing Jenny a photo of a crudely printed flyer. This was in the trash. Jenny examined the image. The flyer advertised a private sporting event at a location called Riverside Ranch, scheduled for the coming weekend. At the bottom was a series of seemingly random numbers and letters. "It's a code," Dawson explained. "Tells insiders where and when the dog fights will be held. We've seen these before, but never managed to catch them in action. They move too frequently, and the locations are remote." "So, he's gone?" Jenny asked, relief washing over her. "Left the area?" Dawson's expression remained grim. "Possibly, but I'm not counting on it. These operations, they're organized. Miller might have called in reinforcements when he realized Shadow could identify him, and that Max witnessed him trying to dispose of evidence." The relief Jenny had briefly felt evaporated. "You think he might come back? For Shadow? For Max?" "It's a possibility we need to prepare for," Dawson admitted. "That's why I'm here. I've spoken with the district attorney. If Max is willing to make a formal statement about what he saw at the creek, we might have enough to get warrants for these suspected fighting locations. Shut down the whole operation instead of just chasing Miller." Jenny's protective instincts flared. "You want Max to testify? He's just a child, Tom. He's only now starting to speak again." "I know," Dawson said gently, "but his drawing, his statement, they're evidence. And if we can stop these people, Max and Shadow will both be safer in the long run." Before Jenny could respond, a commotion erupted from the backyard, Shadow barking sharply, followed by Max's startled cry. Both adults rushed to the window to see Shadow standing at the back fence, hackles raised, while Max stood frozen several feet behind him. Dawson was out the door first, hand on his service weapon, as he scanned the alley beyond the fence. Jenny ran to Max, pulling him against her protectively. "What happened, honey? Are you okay?" Max nodded, his eyes wide but unafraid. "Someone was watching us. Shadow saw them." Dawson returned moments later, his expression troubled. "No sign of anyone now, but there are fresh footprints in the alley. Someone was definitely there." He crouched beside Shadow, who had remained at alert by the fence. "Good job, boy. You're a better guard than most of my deputies." Shadow's posture relaxed slightly at the praise, but his attention remained focused on the fence, as if expecting the watcher to return. "That's it," Dawson decided, standing up. "We need to move you again. Somewhere unexpected." He thought for a moment, then nodded to himself. "My sister's place, out by the lake. It's remote but secure, and nobody would think to look for you there. Pack up. We'll leave in an hour." As they hurriedly gathered their belongings once more, news of the incident spread rapidly through Willow Creek's close-knit community. By noon, half the town seemed to know that Max Brooks and his mother were being moved to a safe location because of threats connected to a dog-fighting ring. By evening, the story had evolved to include details of how Max had rescued Shadow from drowning, how the dog had begun to heal the silent, traumatized boy, and how now both of them were in danger from criminals who wanted to silence them. The community's response was immediate and overwhelming. While Jenny, Max, and Shadow settled into the lake house under Sheriff Dawson's protection, Willow Creek mobilized. Dr. Morales rallied local animal lovers, organizing patrols to watch for suspicious activities near known dog-walking routes. The volunteer fire department increased their evening drive-thrus of outlying areas. Local hunters reported unusual vehicles or gatherings to the sheriff's office. The town's only veterinary clinic offered free checkups for any dogs showing signs of abuse or neglect. Mayor Patricia Chen called an emergency town meeting at the community center, where Sheriff Dawson carefully explained the situation without revealing Max and Shadow's location. The packed room fell silent as he described the suspected dog-fighting ring and the possibility of connections to more serious crimes. One of our own children witnessed something terrible, he concluded, and now he and his mother and the dog he saved need our protection. I'm asking everyone to be vigilant, to report anything unusual, but not to take matters into your own hands. These people are dangerous. In the back of the room, Olivia raised her hand. What about a fundraiser for Shadow's medical bills and maybe a reward for information leading to arrests? The suggestion was met with enthusiastic approval. By the meeting's end, plans were underway for a community barbecue and silent auction dubbed Shadow's Fund. Local businesses pledged donations, craftspeople offered handmade items for the auction, and the elementary school where Olivia taught announced a children's art show themed around rescue animals. This town, Mayor Chen said with pride as the meeting dispersed, takes care of its own. Word of Willow Creek's response reached Jenny through periodic updates from Olivia and Sheriff Dawson. At the lake house, isolated from the community's energy but protected by its care, she watched in amazement as the story of Max and Shadow united the town in a way she hadn't seen since the flash floods of 2018. I never expected this, she confessed to Dawson on his third day of self-appointed guard duty. They sat on the porch of the rustic cabin, watching Max and Shadow play at the water's edge. The German Shepherd's bandages were gone now, his wounds healing into scars that would eventually be covered by his growing coat. He moved with easy grace, splashing in the shallows beside Max, alert but relaxed in the peaceful setting. Small towns stick together, Dawson replied, a hint of pride in his voice. Especially when it comes to protecting children and animals, brings out the best in people. Even so, Jenny said softly, this feels like more than that. It's like Max and Shadow's story touched something in everyone, something hopeful. Dawson nodded thoughtfully. Maybe that's what we all needed. A reminder that healing is possible, even after the worst happens. He glanced at Jenny. You know, the whole town remembers how it was after David died, how Max stopped talking, how you both struggled. Seeing him now, with Shadow, it's like watching a miracle unfold. Gives people hope for their own healing, I suppose. Jenny blinked back unexpected tears, watching as Max threw a stick into the shallow water and Shadow bounded after it. Her son was laughing, actually laughing out loud, the sound carrying across the lake in the clear afternoon air, a sound she had feared she might never hear again. You're right, she whispered. It is a miracle. Later that evening, as twilight settled over the lake, Sheriff Dawson received a call that would change everything. Jenny watched his expression grow increasingly intense as he listened, occasionally asking short, clipped questions. When he hung up, he turned to her with a mixture of excitement and trepidation. That was Deputy Wilson. Someone came forward with information about the dog-fighting ring. One of the locals hired to build temporary pens for the dogs. He's given us the location for this weekend's event and confirmed that Ray Miller is expected to be there. Dawson paused, his gaze shifting to Max and Shadow, who were curled up together on the sofa, both drowsy after their active day. They're planning a big gathering, multiple fights, but that's not all. What else? Jenny asked, dread coiling in her stomach. Dawson lowered his voice. There's apparently a side business at these events. The informant doesn't know details, but mentions special merchandise being auctioned off after the main fights. He saw a room being prepared with small cages. His expression darkened. Jenny, I think this might be connected to those missing children. The floor seemed to drop away beneath Jenny's feet. Oh my God. We're organizing a raid, Dawson continued. State police, county SWAT, FBI, but it's crucial we have solid evidence to ensure convictions. He took a deep breath. That's where Max comes in. His testimony about seeing Miller dump Shadow in the creek could be key to connecting him to both the dogfighting and whatever else is happening at these gatherings. Jenny's protective instincts flared. Absolutely not. I'm not putting Max through that kind of trauma again. I understand your concern, Dawson said gently, but we're not talking about putting him on a witness stand or facing Miller directly. Just a recorded statement with a child psychologist present, something we can use to secure warrants and build a case. Before Jenny could respond, a small voice interrupted them. I want to help, Max said, suddenly alert on the sofa. Shadow sat up beside him, ears forward, as if following the conversation. If it will protect other dogs and other kids. Jenny moved to her son's side, heart aching at his serious expression. Max, honey, you don't have to do this. It's not your responsibility. Max looked up at her, then at Shadow. Something passed between boy and dog, one of those moments of silent communication that still amazed Jenny. Then Max turned back, his voice stronger than she had ever heard it. Shadow was brave when the bad men hurt him. He didn't become mean. He stayed good. Max reached out to stroke the dog's head. I can be brave too, for Shadow, and for the other dogs who don't have anyone to save them. In that moment, looking at her son's resolute expression, Jenny saw not just the echo of the quiet, traumatized child he had been, but a glimpse of the strong, compassionate person he was becoming. And beside him, alert and supportive, was the catalyst for that transformation, a discarded dog who had somehow found the perfect person to heal. The raid on Riverside Ranch took place at dusk on Saturday, exactly 1 week after Max had pulled Shadow from Willow Creek. A coordinated operation involving multiple law enforcement agencies, it resulted in the arrest of 19 people, including Ray Miller, and the rescue of 27 dogs in various states of neglect and injury. News of the successful raid reached the lake house via Sheriff Dawson's radio, bringing relief but also a new tension. The danger wasn't over, not until those arrested were formally charged and denied bail. Max's recorded statement, taken with the gentle guidance of Dr. Winters and with Shadow by his side throughout, proved to be a crucial piece of evidence. His clear, detailed description of seeing Ray Miller dispose of what he thought was a dead dog matched perfectly with Shadow's documented injuries and the location where Max had found him. Combined with the testimony of the informant and evidence gathered during the raid, it created a solid case against Miller for animal cruelty, a felony charge in their state when connected to organized fighting. But it was what else they found at Riverside Ranch that truly shocked the community. 3 children, Sheriff Dawson said grimly when he stopped by the lake house the morning after the raid. They sat on the porch, speaking in hushed tones while Max and Shadow played by the water, blissfully unaware of the horrific details. 2 boys and a girl, ages 6 to 9, hidden in a cellar beneath one of the outbuildings. They'd been there for at least a week, based on their condition. Jenny's hand flew to her mouth. Oh my God, were they physically unharmed for the most part? Dawson assured her quickly. Dehydrated, malnourished, terrified, but no signs of other abuse. Not yet, anyway. The implication hung heavily in the air. They were being held for transport, according to what we've pieced together. These people were trafficking children alongside their dog-fighting operation, using the events as a cover to connect with buyers. Jenny felt sick to her stomach. And they would have gone after Max because he witnessed Miller disposing of Shadow? Dawson nodded grimly. Miller recognized Max that day at your house. His phone records show calls to known associates immediately after. They were planning to take him during the next transport, make it look like one of the recent child disappearances. If Shadow hadn't scared Miller off that first day, if you hadn't called me. He left the sentence unfinished, the alternative too terrible to voice. Shadow saved him, Jenny whispered, watching her son laugh as the German shepherd splashed in the shallows. In more ways than we knew. That dog is something special, Dawson agreed. The prosecutor wants to bring him to the preliminary hearing next week. Says his presence will make a powerful statement to the judge. Jenny frowned. I don't know if that's a good idea, for Max or for Shadow. You wouldn't need to bring Max, Dawson clarified. Just Shadow. Let the judge see what these people did to him. Let them see how he's recovered. It could help ensure the charges stick, maybe even influence bail decisions. Later that evening, after Dawson had left and Max was tucked into bed with Shadow curled protectively at his feet, Jenny sat on the lake house porch, watching moonlight dance across the water and turning the request over in her mind. The idea of parading Shadow in front of a courtroom, exposing him to the stress of seeing Miller again, felt wrong. But if it helped keep the man who had hurt him, who had planned to hurt Max, behind bars. A soft whine interrupted her thoughts. Shadow stood in the doorway, his amber eyes reflecting the porch light. He made a subtle movement with his head, as if beckoning her. Jenny had grown accustomed to these moments of apparent communication from the dog. She rose and followed him inside to Max's bedroom. Her son was sitting up in bed, fully awake, moonlight streaming through the window, illuminating his serious expression. "Shadow woke me," he said simply. "He says we need to talk." Jenny smiled gently at her son's way of expressing things. Max had increasingly spoken of Shadow as if the dog communicated directly with him, sometimes through gestures or behaviors, sometimes in ways Jenny couldn't observe. She'd chosen not to question it, seeing it as part of their unique bond. "What does Shadow want to talk about?" she asked, sitting on the edge of the bed. Max stroked the dog's head as Shadow settled back beside him. "The bad men. Sheriff Dawson wants Shadow to see them again." Jenny's eyebrows rose. She hadn't discussed the prosecutor's request with Max. "You heard us talking?" Max shook his head. Shadow knew. He's not scared to see the bad man again. He wants to help the other dogs, and the kids. He looked up at his mother, eyes wise beyond his years. "We should go, both of us." "Max, honey, you don't have to." "I want to," Max interrupted with unusual firmness. "Shadow says sometimes you have to face the scary things to make them stop being so scary." Jenny blinked back sudden tears, wondering not for the first time at the profound wisdom that seemed to flow between this child and his dog. "When did you get so brave?" she whispered. Max's answer was simple and immediate. "When Shadow showed me how." 3 days later, Willow Creek's community center was transformed for what had been officially named the Shadows Fund Benefit. Colorful banners hung from the rafters, local restaurants had donated food for a massive buffet, and tables around the perimeter displayed items for the silent auction, everything from hand-knitted scarves to weekend getaways at nearby cabins. A corner of the hall was dedicated to the children's art show, featuring dozens of colorful drawings and paintings of dogs, many clearly inspired by Shadow. The guest of honor himself arrived with Max and Jenny shortly after the event began. Shadow, now almost fully recovered, wore a special blue bandana around his neck embroidered with his name, a gift from Olivia's crochet circle. Max held his leash, though it was largely symbolic. Shadow walked perfectly in step with the boy, needing no guidance. A hush fell over the crowd as they entered, followed by spontaneous applause. Max pressed closer to Shadow, momentarily overwhelmed by the attention, but the German Shepherd remained steady beside him, a calming presence amidst the excitement. Mayor Chen approached them first, kneeling to address Max at his level. "We're so proud of you, Max," she said warmly. "You and Shadow have brought this whole town together. Look around. Everyone's here because of what you two did." It was true. The community center was packed with people from every corner of Willow Creek. Farmers in freshly pressed shirts, teachers from the elementary school, shopkeepers who had closed early, teenagers, seniors, young families, all united by the story of a boy and a dog who had saved each other. Max nodded solemnly at the mayor's words, his hand never leaving Shadow's fur. "Shadow says thank you," he replied, voice clear despite his evident shyness. Mayor Chen smiled, apparently taking the child's way of speaking in stride. "Well, we have a little surprise for both of you. Would you like to see it?" Curious, Max looked to his mother, who nodded encouragingly. They followed the mayor to a previously curtained area at the front of the hall. With a flourish, Chen pulled back the fabric to reveal a large wooden plaque mounted on the wall. Carved into it was an image of a German shepherd standing protectively beside a small child, and beneath it the words, "The Shadow Fund, supporting animal rescue and child safety in Willow Creek." "This is going to be a permanent program," the mayor explained, using the money raised today and future donations to help rescued animals and support programs that protect children, all because of you two. Jenny felt tears well in her eyes as she read the plaque. What had begun as a traumatic experience had somehow transformed into something beautiful, a legacy of hope that would continue to help others long after today's event ended. Max studied the carving intently, then whispered something to Shadow. The dog sat tall beside him, amber eyes scanning the crowd as if truly understanding the honor being bestowed upon them. As the evening progressed, Max and Shadow moved through the community center, greeted with warmth and respect by everyone they encountered. Dr. Morales proudly showed them the sign-up sheet for volunteer foster homes for rescued animals, already filled with names. Olivia guided them through the children's art exhibition, where Max's classmates had created pictures celebrating his bravery and Shadow's recovery. But the most profound moment came near the end of the event, when Sheriff Dawson approached the makeshift stage at the front of the hall. The crowd quieted as he tapped the microphone. "I have some news to share," he announced, his weathered face breaking into a rare, broad smile. "Just received word from the district attorney's office. Based on evidence gathered during the raid, including information that led us to similar operations in 3 neighboring states, federal charges have been filed against the key members of the dogfighting ring, including Ray Miller. No bail. They'll remain in custody pending trial." A cheer erupted from the crowd, followed by applause that seemed to lift the roof of the old community center. Jenny hugged Max tightly, relief washing over her in waves. They were safe, truly safe, at last. Additionally, Dawson continued once the noise had subsided, all 3 children recovered during the raid have been reunited with their families, and 20 of the 27 dogs rescued have already been placed in foster homes, with specialized care for their rehabilitation. More applause, punctuated by a few emotional sniffles from the audience. Shadow, who had remained calmly at Max's side throughout the commotion, suddenly perked up, ears forward, tail wagging slightly. He nudged Max, who looked up at his mother with wide eyes. "Shadow wants to say something," he whispered urgently. Jenny exchanged glances with Olivia, who stood nearby. This was new. Max had often spoken for Shadow, but had never suggested the dog wanted to address a crowd. Before Jenny could respond, Max was already moving toward the stage, Shadow matching him step for step. The crowd parted automatically to let them through, conversations hushing, as people noticed the small boy and his dog approaching the sheriff. Dawson, seeing them coming, crouched down. "What is it, Max?" "Shadow has something to say," Max announced, voice carrying in the now silent hall. "To everyone." Dawson's eyes widened slightly, but he recovered quickly, lifting Max onto the stage and helping Shadow up beside him. He adjusted the microphone to Max's height, then stepped back, letting the unlikely pair take center stage. Max stood frozen for a moment, suddenly aware of hundreds of eyes upon him. Shadow pressed against his leg supportively, and the boy took a deep breath. When he spoke, his voice was clear and strong, carrying to every corner of the hushed community center. "Shadow says thank you for helping, for caring about dogs who get hurt by bad people, and for keeping kids safe." Max paused, listening to something only he could hear, then continued. "He says he was scared in the sack in the water. He thought nobody would find him, but then I did." Max's small hand buried itself in Shadow's fur. "Shadow says sometimes the scariest places lead you to where you're supposed to be, to your real home." The profound simplicity of the child's words hung in the air for a breathless moment. Then, from somewhere in the back of the hall, a single person began to applaud. Others joined in, the sound swelling until it filled the space completely. Women wiped tears from their cheeks, men cleared suddenly tight throats, and children asked their parents why everyone was crying over something so happy. Jenny stood transfixed, watching her son, her beautiful, brave son who had been locked in silence for so long, standing confidently before the entire town, giving voice not just to his dog but to something larger than both of them, something about healing and hope and finding light in the darkest places. Mayor Chen approached the stage as the applause finally began to subside. "I think," she said, her own voice thick with emotion, "that's the most perfect way to close our event. Thank you, Max, and thank you, Shadow." Later, as they walked home under a canopy of stars, Max grew thoughtful. "Shadow says we help those other dogs and kids find their way home, too," he said suddenly. Jenny squeezed his small hand. "You did, honey. Both of you." "It feels good," Max decided. "Helping. Shadow says that's how you heal inside, by helping others who are hurt." Jenny looked down at the German Shepherd, walking steadily beside her son, wondering not for the first time at the wisdom this animal somehow imparted. "I think Shadow is very smart," she said softly. Max nodded seriously. "He says he learned it from me first, when I pulled him from the creek. That's when he knew we were supposed to find each other." 6 months later, on a crisp autumn morning, Max started kindergarten. The silent, withdrawn child of the previous spring was unrecognizable in the confident boy who walked through the school doors holding his mother's hand, chattering excitedly about making new friends and learning to read real books. Shadow wasn't with him physically. Dogs weren't allowed in the school building, but Max carried the dog's influence in every step, every word, every smile that came so much more easily now. The nightmares had faded, as had the episodes of paralyzing anxiety that had once kept him home from preschool for weeks at a time. In their place was a quiet confidence, a resilience that amazed Jenny and his therapist alike. Dr. Winters had called it a remarkable recovery, attributing much of Max's progress to his bond with Shadow. The German Shepherd provided security, consistency, and unconditional acceptance during a critical period of healing. But there was more to it than simple pet therapy, she had acknowledged. The unique communication between boy and dog, whether real or a psychological coping mechanism, had given Max a bridge back to the speaking world when nothing else could reach him. Shadow waited at home during school hours, always at the front window around dismissal time, somehow knowing exactly when to expect Max's return. Jenny had grown used to finding them together in quiet moments, Max reading aloud from his picture books while Shadow listened attentively, or the two of them simply sitting side by side on the porch, watching birds and sharing secrets that needed no words. The Shadow Fund, meanwhile, had exceeded all expectations. What began as a community fundraiser had evolved into a registered nonprofit, with Olivia serving as its first director. The organization now supported animal rescue efforts throughout the county and funded a pioneering program that trained therapy dogs to work with traumatized children. Shadow himself had become something of a mascot, making regular visits to the children's hospital in the neighboring city, where his gentle presence brought comfort to young patients facing their own battles. Ray Miller and 12 others from the dogfighting ring were convicted on multiple federal charges, their sentences ensuring they would remain in prison for decades. The publicity surrounding the case had led to increased awareness and strengthened legislation against animal cruelty and child trafficking, creating a legacy of protection that extended far beyond Willow Creek. On the anniversary of the day Max had pulled Shadow from the creek, Jenny took a photo of the two of them sitting on the dock where their story had begun. Max, now 5, his face fuller and healthier than it had been a year before, sat with his arm around Shadow's neck. The German Shepherd's coat had grown back thick and glossy, the scars of his former life visible only if you knew exactly where to look. Both gazed at the camera with a serene confidence, as if they knew exactly who they were and where they belonged. Jenny posted the photo on the Shadow Fund's website with a simple caption. Sometimes the ones who have been hurt the most have the most love to give. Sometimes saving another life saves your own. The post went viral overnight. Thousands of shares, hundreds of thousands of reactions, comments from around the world expressing how deeply the story of Max and Shadow had touched people's hearts. News outlets picked it up, leading to interviews and feature stories. A children's book author reached out about creating a picture book based on their journey. A documentary filmmaker began planning a short film about the impact of their bond on the community and beyond. But none of that mattered much to Max and Shadow. For them, the miracle wasn't in the public recognition or the broader impact of their story. It was in the quiet moments, Max whispering his dreams into Shadow's ear, Shadow keeping nightmares at bay with his watchful presence, the two of them healing together one day at a time. On a warm spring afternoon, nearly 2 years after their paths had crossed, Max sat doing homework at the kitchen table, while Shadow dozed beside his chair. The German Shepherd's ear twitched suddenly, and he lifted his head, alert to a sound too faint for human ears. "What is it, boy?" Max asked, instantly attuned to his companion's shift in mood. Shadow rose and trotted to the window overlooking the backyard. Max followed, peering out to see what had caught the dog's attention. In the dappled shade beneath the old oak tree, a small, scrawny cat was cautiously approaching the water dish they kept filled for local wildlife. "She's hungry," Max observed quietly, "and scared." Shadow made a soft sound in his throat. Not a growl, but a kind of thoughtful rumble. Max nodded as if the dog had spoken aloud. "You're right," he agreed. "We should help her." Together they went to the back door. Max moved slowly, careful not to startle the nervous feline. Shadow, despite his size and history, showed no aggression toward the cat, only the same patient watchfulness he brought to all things. Jenny, coming into the kitchen with a basket of laundry, paused to observe the scene. Her son, once locked in silence, now narrating his thoughts freely. Her dog, once discarded and abused, now a gentle guide. And now, perhaps, a new soul for them to heal together. "Mom," Max called, without turning around, somehow sensing her presence. "There's a cat in our yard. She needs help. Can we?" Jenny smiled, setting down the laundry basket. "Of course we can," she said, joining them at the door. "That's what we do, isn't it?" Max looked up at her, then at Shadow, who sat calmly beside him, amber eyes fixed on the frightened creature in their yard. "Yeah," the boy said with the simple wisdom of a child who had learned life's most profound lesson in the most unexpected way. "That's what we do. We find the ones who are lost and scared, and we bring them home." Shadow's tail thumped softly against the floor. Once, twice in silent agreement. Another rescue, another healing. Another chapter in the extraordinary journey that had begun on that misty morning by Willow Creek, when a silent boy and a discarded dog found in each other exactly what they needed to become whole again. Don't forget to like, share, and let us know in the comments what part of Max and Shadow's journey touched your heart the most. Remember, every animal deserves a second chance, and sometimes the ones who save them end up being saved themselves.